The girl arrived at the school gates early in the morning, long before most students even left their homes. She always preferred it that way. The quieter the surroundings, the easier it was for her to take a deep breath and gather the courage she needed to face the day. She held her backpack tightly, almost as if she was afraid it would slip away from her hands. It was her first week in this new school, and every step she took into the building felt heavier than the last. She walked through the empty hallways, listening to the faint echo of her own footsteps. The floors were clean, the walls were covered with student artwork, and everything smelled slightly of old books. She liked that smell. It reminded her of home, where music sheets and books were scattered across the small living room her family shared. Back home, she never needed to explain herself. She never had to answer questions she didn't have the strength to answer. But here, everything felt different. Here, she was the new girl. The quiet girl. The girl no one understood, yet every classroom door she passed had chatter behind it, even though the school day hadn't officially started. She finally reached her classroom, stood in front of the door, and hesitated for a moment. She heard laughter inside. She wondered if they were laughing at her already, even without knowing her name. But she tried to ignore the thought, pushed the door open gently, and walked in. Only a few students were seated. They glanced at her, but didn't greet her. She didn't expect them to. She gave a small nod to no one in particular and took her usual seat, the one near the back corner, close to the window. She always chose the same spot because it felt like a small shield. From there, she could observe everything without being trapped in the center of attention. She placed her notebook on the table, opened it to a blank page, and pretended to write something. In reality, her mind was far away from the school. She thought about the music waiting for her at home. The old piano her grandfather had left behind. The soft, worn-out keys that had shaped her childhood. She remembered how her mother would sit beside her, listening to every note with quiet pride. Music was her safe place, the one part of her life that never scared her. But here, in this classroom, she didn't want anyone to know about it. She wasn't ready for questions or curious eyes, or the possibility of being laughed at. She wanted to stay invisible, at least until she learned how things worked in this new school. As more students entered, the room grew louder. Some chatted about weekend plans, others argued about something on their phones, and a few kept glancing at the girl in the back as if trying to figure her out. She looked down at her notebook again, hoping the room would forget she existed, and the teacher walked in. She was a tall woman with a sharp voice, the kind that made everyone sit up straight without being told. Her eyes scanned the room quickly, landing on every student as if she could read their thoughts. She was one of those teachers who expected things to be done her way, without excuses. "Good morning, everyone," she said with a brisk tone. "I hope you all remember what we discussed last week about the annual arts performance. Each of you will show a skill. Singing, playing an instrument, dancing, anything. I don't want complaints. I don't want excuses. This is part of your grade, and it's also part of building your confidence." The girl's heart dropped. She had hoped this day would pass without her being noticed. She had hoped the teacher would focus on the louder kids, the ones who liked showing off. But now the spotlight felt closer than she wanted. The teacher continued calling out names, asking each student what they planned to perform. Most of them spoke confidently. One boy said he would perform a drum solo. A girl said she would sing. Another student announced she would dance with her group. When the teacher finally looked toward the back corner, her eyes narrowed slightly. "You," she said, pointing toward the quiet girl. "You're new. What will you be performing?" The girl's throat tightened. She hadn't prepared an answer. She barely even knew how to speak up in this room. Everyone turned to look at her, waiting. She opened her mouth slightly, but no words came out. Her fingers pressed against her notebook. She wished she could sink through the floor. The teacher tapped her foot, growing impatient. "Well," she said, "everyone must participate. What is your talent?" The girl swallowed hard. She tried again to speak, but all that came out was a small whisper that no one understood. A few students giggled quietly. The teacher's brows pulled together. "Speak up. What can you do? Singing? Dancing? Something?" The girl shook her head lightly. She didn't dislike music. She simply didn't want to reveal it here. Not yet, not like this. Not under pressure. The teacher sighed loudly, enough to make the entire room feel the weight of her disappointment. "If you don't choose, I will choose for you," she said. "And trust me, you won't enjoy that." The girl's eyes dropped to her notebook again. She remained still. Class continued, but the teacher kept glancing toward the back throughout the lesson. Every time the girl noticed, she felt smaller. She didn't mean to upset anyone. She just wanted time. She wanted to adjust quietly, without drawing attention. When the lunch bell rang, the rest of the class rushed out. The girl stayed seated for a moment, letting the noise fade before she even thought of standing up. She packed her notebook slowly, hoping no one would bother her as she left. But just as she reached the door, she heard the teacher's voice. "Stay a moment." The girl stopped. She turned slowly and walked back inside. The teacher stood with her arms crossed, looking her up and down as if trying to solve a puzzle. "Why didn't you answer me earlier?" The teacher asked. The girl's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't explain anything. You're old enough to speak when spoken to. You need to learn that." The girl lowered her head again. She didn't know how to explain her fear or her shyness, or how her mind froze whenever eyes were on her. The teacher continued, "This event is important. I won't allow anyone to avoid it, not even you. So tomorrow you will show us something. And if you don't choose, I'll decide for you." The girl nodded quietly. "Good," the teacher said. "You may go now." The girl walked out of the classroom, feeling even smaller than she had that morning. The hallway felt longer this time, and the sound of other students chatting seemed louder than usual. She kept her eyes on the floor and found a quiet corner to sit alone. She took out her lunch, but barely touched it. Her thoughts kept replaying what happened. She wondered why speaking felt so hard for her. She wondered why she couldn't be like other students, who talked easily and laughed without worrying. She wondered how she would survive tomorrow. For the rest of the day, she avoided drawing attention to herself. She listened quietly in class, took notes, and answered questions only when she absolutely had to. Most students ignored her, but a few looked at her with curiosity or amusement. They whispered things she couldn't hear and didn't want to hear. When the final bell rang, she hurried out of the building and walked home quickly. The moment she entered her house, her shoulders relaxed. Her mother greeted her with a warm smile. "How was school?" Her mother asked, but the girl just shrugged softly. She didn't want to worry her mother with details. "Everything okay?" Her mother asked again. Another small shrug. "I'm fine." Her mother didn't pressure her. She simply placed a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. "You're strong. You'll be okay." The girl managed a faint smile before walking toward the corner of the living room. There, against the wall, stood the old piano. Its keys were chipped in a few places, and some strings buzzed faintly, but it still carried the warmth of countless memories. She sat on the bench and lifted the fallboard slowly. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a moment, feeling the familiar comfort wash over her. Then she began to play. Soft notes filled the room, gentle and smooth like a forgotten dream. Her mother walked quietly to the kitchen, letting the music breathe through the house. The girl poured her emotions into every note, her fear, her confusion, her loneliness, and her hope. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know how she would face the teacher or the students. She didn't know if she would be forced to reveal this hidden part of herself. But as her fingers danced across the keys, she reminded herself of one thing she did know. Music was the only place where she never felt invisible. And even if the world outside didn't understand her yet, the piano always would. She played until the sun dipped behind the trees and the room grew dim. Only then did she stop, closing the piano gently and placing her hands in her lap. Tomorrow was coming, whether she wanted it or not. But for now, in this quiet space, she allowed herself one small moment of peace before the storm she knew she couldn't avoid. The next morning came faster than the girl wanted. She barely slept the night before, turning from one side of the bed to the other as her mind kept repeating the teacher's words. She knew today wouldn't be easy. She knew the teacher would expect something from her, something she wasn't ready to give. But morning arrived anyway, and she had no choice but to get dressed and face the day. She left her house earlier than usual, hoping that reaching school before everyone else might help her breathe a little. The air outside was cool, the sky still painted in soft shades of early light. She held her bag close to her chest, as if the simple weight of it could give her strength. When she entered the building, it was quiet, just like the day before. She always loved this part, the silence before the noise. It gave her a moment to gather herself. But even in the silence, her mind was full of worry. She walked to the classroom and sat in her corner seat again, the same place she always chose. She placed her notebook and pencil on the desk, but didn't open them. Instead, she stared out the window, watching the schoolyard slowly wake up. Students began arriving in groups. Some walked in with loud laughter, others with sleepy faces. A few looked excited, talking about their performances for the school event. She listened quietly, though she didn't want to. Every mention of singing or dancing reminded her of what waited for her today. The teacher walked in exactly as the bell rang. Her steps were sharp, her expression serious as always. She placed her bag on the desk and looked around the room, her eyes landing on each student as if checking who was ready and who wasn't. The girl lowered her eyes, hoping to go unnoticed, but she could already feel the teacher's gaze brushing over her. Class began as usual, but the air felt different, heavier somehow. The teacher seemed tense, maybe because the event was getting closer, and she wanted everything to go perfectly. She didn't tolerate mistakes. She didn't like delays. And she especially didn't like students who didn't follow instructions. Throughout the morning lessons, the teacher kept glancing at the girl. Every time it happened, the girl's stomach tightened. She knew what was coming. She knew it was only a matter of time. When the first half of the morning passed, the teacher finally said, "We will stop here for a moment. I want to check something before we continue." The room went silent. The teacher picked up a small notebook from her desk. As you all remember, each student must present a musical skill. I already know what most of you will do, but one person has not told me anything yet. The girl felt every eye turn toward her before the teacher even said her name. "You at the back," the teacher said. "Stand up." Her hands shook as she rose to her feet. Her throat was dry, and her heart pounded so loudly she wondered if others could hear it. The teacher's expression was firm, but not unkind, more like she was determined to get a result. "You need to participate. You didn't give me a choice yesterday, so I'm giving you a task today." The girl's face warmed with fear. "You will play something on the piano today," the teacher said. A soft wave of whispers spread through the room. Some students turned around to look at her with curiosity. Others smirked, as if expecting something funny to happen. The girl shook her head slightly, without meaning to. I can't," she whispered. The teacher sighed, not in anger, but in frustration. "Every student here is trying. You're not being asked to be perfect. You're being asked to show effort. We have a piano in the music room, and you're going to play something today. Even if it's simple." The girl swallowed hard. Her hands squeezed the edge of her desk. "But I can't," she said in a barely audible voice. The teacher raised an eyebrow. "You don't know how to play?" The girl froze. She didn't know what to say. She did know how to play better than most, but she didn't want anyone to know. She didn't want the attention or the questions. She didn't want the spotlight. Before she could answer, one of the boys at the front laughed softly. "Maybe she's scared she'll break it," he whispered to his friend. Another student joined in. "She probably doesn't even know what a piano is," someone else joked. The girl felt heat rise to her cheeks. She lowered her head again. The teacher tapped on her desk sharply, stopping the whispers. "Enough. No one will make fun of anyone in my class." The room quieted immediately. The teacher looked back at the girl. "You will have a chance to try. That's all I'm asking." The girl didn't nod. She didn't shake her head. She simply stood there, trapped between fear and uncertainty. The teacher took her silence as agreement. "Good. We'll go to the music room after lunch. You may sit now." The girl sat down slowly. Her hands trembled as she opened her notebook again. Her pencil scratched lightly on the paper, though she wasn't really writing anything. She just needed something to focus on other than the rising anxiety in her chest. When the lunch bell rang, the girl waited for everyone else to leave the room. She didn't want to walk out with the crowd. She didn't want to hear their whispers or see their amused glances. Once the room was empty, she stood up, grabbed her bag, and walked quietly down the hallway. Instead of going to the cafeteria, she went outside to a quiet spot behind the school building. It was shaded by a tall tree and had a small bench. She sat there, listening to the distant sounds of students laughing and talking. She opened her lunch but barely ate. Her stomach felt too tight to take in food. She thought about the piano. She thought about how playing at home felt like breathing easy, natural, comforting. But playing in front of others? That felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. She didn't want the teacher to be disappointed. But she also didn't want to reveal something she kept so close to her heart. Her hands rested on her knees. They were shaking lightly. She tried to calm herself, reminding herself that she had nothing to lose. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She just needed to get through the moment. When lunch ended, she returned to the building slowly. The hallways were crowded again. Students rushed in every direction, talking loudly and bumping into each other. She kept her head down as she made her way to the classroom. The teacher was waiting by the door when she arrived. "Come with me," she said. The girl nodded and followed her in silence. She walked behind the teacher down the hallway, turning right toward a part of the school she had never visited before. They stopped in front of a large room with double doors. The teacher opened them and stepped inside. The room was filled with instruments, drums, guitars, stands, and a few old music books scattered on a shelf. But the piano sat in the corner, its polished surface reflecting the soft lights above. It wasn't new, but it was well kept. The keys looked clean, and the bench looked comfortable. The girl's breath caught in her throat. The teacher walked to the piano and placed her hand on the lid. "This is where students practice. No one else is here right now, so relax. I'm not asking for a performance. I just want you to try." The girl stood still, unable to move. "Come closer," the teacher said, her tone softer than before. The girl hesitated for a moment before taking a step, then another, and another. She reached the piano and looked at it, feeling a strange mix of longing and fear. "Sit," the teacher said. The girl sat on the bench slowly. Her fingers brushed against the worn edges of the seat. "Play something," the teacher instructed. "Anything, even if it's just a simple tune." The girl placed her hands on her lap, breathing shakily. She lifted her fingers, and placed them gently on the keys. The feel of them was familiar, smooth, cool, comforting. Her heart still raced, but there was a small spark of calm beginning to grow. But before she could play a note, the teacher said, "You can take your time. I'm not rushing you." The girl nodded softly. Her fingers rested on the keys again. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the way the piano felt at home. She could almost hear the echo of her mother's voice, telling her she was doing great. When she finally opened her eyes, the teacher was watching her closely, not with impatience, but with curiosity. The girl pressed one key gently. A soft sound filled the room. Then another, and another. She wasn't playing a full melody yet, just touching the piano like someone waking an old friend. The teacher waited quietly. After a long moment, the girl took a slow breath, steadying her hands. She was about to play Dot, and though she didn't know it yet, the next few minutes would change everything for her, for the teacher, and for everyone who doubted her. The girl sat at the piano bench, her fingers gently resting on the keys, as the quiet room waited for her first real note. The teacher stood a short distance behind her, arms crossed, but with an expression that was different from earlier. She was no longer impatient. Now she simply looked curious, almost thoughtful, as if she wasn't sure what to expect from this moment. The girl took a slow breath. Her hands trembled, but she tried to steady them. Touching the piano felt like touching a piece of home. Still, the fear of being watched made her heart pound faster. She wasn't used to playing when someone stood so close. She wasn't used to being expected to prove anything. She usually played alone, late in the evening when the world felt quiet. She pressed a key again, softer this time. The sound echoed gently around the room. She pressed another, then another, warming her fingers, reminding herself how the keys responded. The teacher didn't say a word. She simply observed that Dot. After a moment of slow warming, the girl closed her eyes. She needed a second to forget the pressure and the quiet footsteps behind her. She took one deep breath, then opened her eyes again, focusing on the piano in front of her. Then finally, she played Dot at first. It was only a few soft notes, broken and hesitant, like footsteps of someone walking into cold water. But slowly, as her fingers found their courage, the melody grew clearer. It was gentle at the beginning, almost shy, mirroring her own nature. The teacher lifted her head slightly, surprised by the shift in the room. She didn't expect the girl to play at all. She thought she would barely manage a few notes, or maybe stumble through something simple. But the melody flowing from the girl's hands was not simple. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it had shape. It had emotion. Every note seemed to come from a place deep inside her, a place she never shared with others. Her fingers moved with a quiet confidence. She didn't look at the teacher. She didn't look at anything except the keys. The piano became her world. The teacher slowly uncrossed her arms. She stepped a little closer, amazed by how naturally the girl played. Even a beginner could press keys, but this was different. This was the sound of someone who had spent years touching a piano, learning how to speak through it. The girl's hands continued to glide across the keys, growing smoother with each second. Her nervous breathing steadied. The melody slowly expanded, gently rising and falling like waves on a calm shore. The teacher blinked, trying to understand what she was hearing. How could someone this quiet, this shy, this hidden, play like this? Finally, after almost a minute of soft music, the girl finished with one last warm note that hung in the air before fading. She lowered her hands quickly, pulling them into her lap as if afraid she had done something wrong. The room fell silent. The teacher didn't speak for several seconds. She was still processing the unexpected moment. "Where did you learn that?" The teacher finally asked, her voice softer than before. The girl stared at her hands. "At home," she whispered. "How long have you been playing?" She hesitated. Since I was little. The teacher's eyes widened slightly. She didn't expect such a simple answer. She didn't expect the truth to be this natural. You never told anyone? The teacher asked. The girl shook her head. No. Why not? Her voice shook slightly. I don't like when people watch me. The teacher slowly nodded. It made sense now. The girl wasn't refusing to participate out of arrogance or laziness. She wasn't trying to avoid responsibility. She was simply afraid of attention, afraid of judgment, afraid of standing out. You're very talented, the teacher said honestly. The girl looked up for a second. Unsure if she heard correctly, the teacher continued, I've taught many students. Very few play with this kind of feeling. The girl lowered her eyes again, but this time not out of fear. She felt something warm and unfamiliar, maybe pride, or maybe relief. Would you play something else? The teacher asked gently. The girl hesitated again. She wasn't used to someone asking so nicely. She wasn't used to praise. But after a moment, she nodded. Her fingers returned to the keys, and she began a new melody. This one was slightly different. It had a bit more energy, a bit more complexity. She wasn't thinking anymore. She was simply playing. The teacher watched with growing amazement. She realized that forcing the girl to perform earlier had been a mistake. This girl didn't need pressure. She needed space. She needed patience. The second melody continued for a couple of minutes before the girl slowly brought it to an end. She lifted her hands again, waiting for the teacher's reaction. The teacher exhaled deeply. This is incredible, she said, unable to hide her surprise. The girl fiddled with her fingers, unsure how to handle the compliment. You must play at the event, the teacher said firmly but kindly. You have a gift. The whole school should hear it. The girl's heart dropped. She had feared this might happen. I can't, she said quickly. The teacher frowned slightly. Why not? The girl looked away. I get scared. When people watch me, I can't breathe right. The teacher softened her tone. I understand, but you don't have to be afraid. You're ready. More ready than many students I've seen. The girl shook her head. No, I can't do it. The teacher didn't argue right away. She wasn't angry. She was thinking. She finally said, How about this? You don't decide now. You practice for a few days. You play whenever you feel comfortable. And then we'll see. The girl looked up uncertainly. The teacher smiled gently, something the girl had never seen from her before. You don't have to do anything today. Just try. The girl didn't know what to say, but the teacher's gentle tone made her feel less trapped. The teacher stepped back. For now, you can return to class. But know this, you are capable of far more than you think. The girl nodded quietly, stood up, and followed the teacher back to the classroom. When they entered, some students turned their heads to look at her. They expected something dramatic, maybe even funny. But the teacher simply said, We will continue our work now. The girl sat in her corner seat again. She felt different, though she couldn't explain why. Maybe it was because she had finally played in front of someone, and nothing bad had happened. Maybe it was because the teacher had changed her tone. Or maybe it was because part of her felt a little less invisible. Still, she didn't want anyone else to know. She didn't want eyes watching her, or whispers floating behind her back. But she couldn't stop thinking about the piano. Throughout the rest of the day, she kept remembering how it felt to play, how the room reacted to the sound, how the teacher looked at her surprised, impressed, and almost proud. When the final bell rang, she slipped out quietly like she always did. She walked home with slow steps, replaying every moment in her head. At home, she greeted her mother softly. How was your day today? Her mother asked. The girl hesitated. It was okay. Her mother smiled. "You sound different today." The girl didn't answer. She simply walked to the old piano in the corner and lifted the fallboard again. Her mother sat on the couch and listened quietly. She didn't ask questions. She didn't push. She could always sense when something was on her daughter's mind. The girl began to play the same melody she played for the teacher earlier. As she played, she felt her chest loosen. She felt her thoughts clear. She felt herself settling into the one place in the world where nothing scared her. Her mother listened with a soft smile. "You should be proud of yourself," she said gently when the girl finished. The girl shrugged lightly. "I don't know." Her mother leaned forward. "You are talented. You know that. But more than that, you have a heart that shows in your music. Not everyone has that." The girl looked down at her hands again. They were still trembling slightly, but less than before. "Your teacher heard you play today, didn't she?" her mother asked. The girl looked up in surprise. "How did you know?" "A mother knows," she said with a small laugh. The girl smiled faintly. "What did she say?" her mother asked. "She said, 'I'm talented.'" Her mother nodded proudly. "She's right, and she wants me to play at the school event." Her mother's eyebrows raised. "And how do you feel about that?" "I don't know," the girl whispered. "I'm scared." Her mother reached out and held her hand gently. Being scared doesn't mean you can't do something. Sometimes it means you're standing at the beginning of something new. The girl listened quietly. "You don't have to decide right now," her mother continued. "But give yourself a chance. Don't hide your gift because you're afraid." The girl thought about it for a long moment. She wasn't ready to say yes. But for the first time, she wasn't ready to say no either. That night, before bed, she lay awake again. But this time, her thoughts weren't as heavy. Instead of imagining everything that could go wrong, she remembered the teacher's surprised face. She remembered how the room felt when she played. She remembered that for a moment. She wasn't invisible. She closed her eyes slowly. And for the first time since coming to the new school, she felt a small hint of hope that tomorrow, she knew, would bring new decisions, new challenges. But maybe, just maybe, it would also bring new courage. The girl sat on the piano bench, feeling the weight of 100 eyes settling on her back. The classroom was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that did not feel peaceful at all. It felt like everyone was waiting for her to fail. She could sense the teacher standing near the desk with arms crossed, expecting nothing more than a few wrong notes and confusion. The students in their seats leaned forward a little, whispering among themselves. Some of them even smiled as if they were already predicting a moment that would become a joke, passed around for days. But the girl did not move. Her hands rested on her lap, fingers curled slightly, still shaking from the pressure she felt building in her chest. She wondered how things had reached this point, how just being quiet had turned into something people assumed was weakness or defiance. She wanted to explain, but her voice had always refused to rise when she needed it most. The piano sat in front of her, old and dull in color, with a few scratches on its wooden frame. She had seen it from afar many times, but never touched it in school before today. For a moment, she closed her eyes. She counted her breaths the way she had learned on nights when she did not know how to calm her thoughts. 1, slow and shaky. 2, a little steadier. 3, enough to make her lift her head. When she opened her eyes again, something inside her settled. She gently placed her hands on the keys, not yet pressing them, just feeling the cool smoothness beneath her fingertips. The sound of students whispering became softer in her ears. She focused only on the piano dot. No one expected what happened next. As her fingers lowered, the first notes spread through the room. The melody came out soft at first, like a whispering breeze moving through a quiet field. The room shifted with the sound. The whispers faded. Even the teacher's posture changed as she leaned forward, no longer with frustration, but with surprise slipping across her face. The girl's hands moved with confidence she had not shown anywhere else. She played in a way that hinted at long hours spent, practicing in small rooms where no one judged her. The music grew fuller, stretching into every corner of the classroom. A few students blinked, as if trying to understand how someone they barely noticed had such skill hidden inside her. The girl did not look at anyone. Her eyes stayed on the keys, her focus deep, her posture steady. Though her heart raced, the notes rose and fell like a story unfolding without words. There was joy in the higher tones, sadness in the deeper ones, and something honest in the way she blended them. A kind of truth she could never speak aloud. She did not think about impressing anyone. She did not think about fear anymore. She only thought about the music she had carried inside her for so long. The teacher stood still, no longer looking stern. Her face softened, almost confused by her own reaction. She had expected a moment she could use to scold, to push the girl out of her shell in the wrong way. Instead, she stood listening to a performance that felt like something far too mature for the classroom. Something that did not belong to a shy girl trying to hide, but to someone with real passion. The melody shifted again, becoming gentler. Her fingers danced lightly, as if she were painting the air with sound. Every key she touched seemed to hold meaning. Even those who had laughed earlier now sat with wide eyes. The room was completely silent, except for the music. Halfway through the piece, the girl took a small breath, her chest rising slowly. She was not thinking about how people viewed her anymore. She was remembering the nights she spent sitting by an old piano at home, playing until the house was quiet. She remembered her grandfather sitting nearby, listening with closed eyes, telling her she had something special, even if she did not believe it. He had always encouraged her to keep playing, telling her music was a voice that could be louder than words. As she continued, she poured every memory and every emotion into each note. She let the music grow stronger, reaching a point where the room seemed to hold its breath. The teacher's expression shifted again, this time showing a hint of guilt. Perhaps she realized the mistake she had made, assuming the girl's silence meant disinterest. When the melody reached its peak, the room felt almost alive. The students watched her hands move as though they were witnessing something unreal. The sound touched something in them, something quiet and unexpected. It was not just talent. It was heart. As the final notes approached, the music began to soften slowly, almost as if the girl was gently closing a story she had been telling. She lifted her fingers lightly at the last note, letting it ring for a moment longer before it faded completely. Silence returned to the room, but it was not the same kind of silence she had heard at the beginning. This one felt full, filled with the weight of everything that had just happened. No one spoke, not even the students who always had something to say. The girl slowly lifted her hands from the keys and placed them back in her lap. She kept her eyes down, afraid to look up. She wondered if they would think it was too much, or if they would say she showed off. All those worries crowded her mind at once, even though she had just done something brave. The teacher was the first person to move. She stepped closer, her footsteps quiet but steady. The girl heard them and held her breath. She waited for the teacher to speak, but no words came right away. The teacher stood beside the piano, looking down at her with an expression the girl could not read. Finally, the teacher asked softly, "Where did you learn to play like that?" There was no anger in her voice, no disappointment, only surprise and something that sounded almost like respect. The girl looked up slowly, her eyes unsure. She answered in a quiet voice, explaining that she learned at home, practicing every evening. She said her family could not afford lessons, so she learned from old recordings and worn-out books her grandfather had saved. The teacher listened without interrupting, her face changing with each word. The students listened too, absorbing every detail. Some of them exchanged looks, realizing they had misjudged her all along. The teacher took a breath, her expression softening even more. She told the girl she had real talent that should be shared. The teacher spoke in a calmer tone than she had used all year, telling her she deserved recognition for what she could do. The girl blinked in surprise. She had expected criticism, maybe even anger. But instead, the teacher praised her. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that felt honest. The students began whispering again. But this time, the sound was different. It carried wonder, not mockery. A few of them smiled, not out of amusement, but out of genuine admiration. It was as if the performance had shifted the entire classroom's view of her. The teacher then turned to the class and said they had just witnessed something rare. She told them they should appreciate what they saw, because not everyone had the courage to share something so personal. The girl sat quietly, unsure how to respond to all the attention. She felt her cheeks grow warm, not out of embarrassment anymore, but because she had shown a part of herself she had hidden for so long. She did not know what would happen next, but something had changed in that room. The teacher asked her to stay after class so they could talk more about her music. The girl nodded softly. She still felt nervous, but not in the same way as before. Instead, she felt something close to relief. Finally, someone had seen her for who she really was. As the class ended and students gathered their things, a few approached her. Their voices were softer than usual, carrying kindness instead of teasing. They congratulated her, some awkwardly, some more confidently, but all with sincerity. It felt new and strange, but nice. The teacher waited by her desk until everyone left. The girl looked back at the piano one last time, wondering how something so simple could change so much in one moment. She stood up from the bench slowly, her hands no longer shaking. She knew things would not be the same as before. She had found a way to speak without words, and people had finally listened. She walked toward the teacher, ready for a conversation she never expected to have. And as she took her first step, she felt something she had not felt in a long time, a small but growing sense of confidence. Like a quiet light beginning to rise inside her. The classroom emptied slowly after the performance, but the silence that followed stayed in the air like a soft echo. The girl remained seated for a moment on the piano bench, her fingers brushing lightly over the keys, as if still feeling the last notes beneath her skin. She was not sure what would happen now. She had shown a part of herself she never meant to share, and she felt exposed in a way that frightened her. At the same time, there was a strange calm inside her chest, something warm that she had not felt in years. The teacher waited near her desk, watching the girl in a way that was different from before. There was no frustration on her face, no impatience, only thoughtfulness. The girl felt that shift even without looking directly at her. When the final student walked out the door, the teacher spoke gently. "Come here. I want to talk to you." The girl stood slowly. Her legs felt strange, almost unsteady, like she had run a long race. She kept her eyes lowered as she walked to the front of the room, unsure what the teacher would say. She held her hands together, twisting her fingers nervously. The teacher sat on the edge of her desk and didn't speak right away. She looked at the girl as if trying to understand her for the first time. "You surprised me today," the teacher finally said, her tone softer than usual. "I didn't expect that at all. You're playing." It was beautiful. The girl felt her face warm, unsure how to respond. Compliments were not something she heard often, especially not about something that mattered so deeply to her. "Why didn't you tell me you could play like that?" The teacher continued. The girl shrugged lightly, still looking at the floor. "I didn't think anyone would care," she said quietly. The teacher took a slow breath. I was wrong to push you the way I did, she admitted. I thought you were avoiding participation. I didn't realize you were hiding something so special. Those words surprised the girl more than anything else. She looked up slightly, catching the teacher's eyes. They were sincere, real. There was regret in them. Something she never thought she would see. Music like that shouldn't be kept hidden, the teacher said. You have a gift, and gifts deserve to be shared. The girl didn't know how to explain that her silence was not meant to hide her gift, but to protect it. Music was the only place she never felt judged, the only thing she could trust. Sharing it felt like risking everything. But today, that risk had brought something unexpected. The teacher asked her more about her background. When she started playing, who taught her, how she practiced. The girl answered slowly, opening up piece by piece. She explained how her grandfather showed her the basics when she was small, how she learned the rest from old books, videos, and hours of practice. She explained how the piano in her home wasn't in great condition, but she played it every evening because it made her feel calm. The teacher listened closely, nodding as the girl spoke. She seemed impressed by the amount of dedication it took to learn without formal lessons. You're remarkable, the teacher said softly, and I'd like you to perform in the school event next month. As the main pianist, not just part of the group performance. The girl froze. Her heart jumped painfully against her ribs. Perform in front of the whole school? The idea shocked her. I don't think I can do that, she whispered. That's too many people. The teacher shook her head gently. You can. You just don't believe it yet. After what I heard today, I know you're capable. And I'll help you prepare if you'll let me. The girl bit her lip, unsure. The thought scared her, but there was also a small spark inside her, something that whispered maybe she could do it. The teacher wasn't forcing her. She was offering. Think about it, the teacher added. You don't have to decide right now. The girl nodded slowly. That alone eased some of the pressure. The teacher thanked her again for the performance, then told her she could head home. The girl collected her bag and walked out of the classroom, feeling strangely light, like something inside her had shifted dot as she walked down the hallway. A few students passed her. Instead of avoiding her or whispering behind her back, they smiled at her. One of them gave her a small nod, as if acknowledging her in a way they never had before. Another said, "That was amazing," in a soft voice before walking away. The girl didn't know how to react. She simply kept walking, clutching her bag in both hands. These small gestures felt unfamiliar, but they warmed her heart. When she stepped outside, the air felt cool and refreshing. The sun had lowered slightly, painting the schoolyard with warm colors. She walked slowly, letting everything replay in her mind. The moment the music filled the room, the shocked faces, the silence afterward, the teacher's apology. That night, her family noticed something different about her. She hummed softly while setting the table, something she hadn't done in a long time. Her grandfather especially noticed. You look lighter today, he said gently as he watched her from his chair. She hesitated. I played at school today. Oh? His eyes brightened. How did it go? She sat down beside him and told him everything, how the teacher forced her to play, how scared she was, how the room changed once she started. She told him about the teacher's apology, the offer to perform at the event, and the reactions from her classmates. Her grandfather listened with a warm smile, nodding proudly. I always knew you had something inside you that others would see someday. I'm glad they finally saw it. She leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling comfort wash over her. His support always felt like a safe place. But performing at the event, I don't know if I can. He patted her hand gently. You don't have to decide now, but don't let fear stop you from shining. You have a light, my dear. Let it grow when you're ready. Later that night, she sat at the old piano in their living room. The keys were slightly uneven, the paint chipped in places, but she loved it. She touched one key and another, playing softly. Her thoughts drifted back to the classroom, the silence after her last note, the relieved feeling in her chest. She closed her eyes and let her fingers move across the keys. The melody she played was slow and thoughtful, filled with feelings she didn't know how to speak aloud. She thought about the teacher's words, the way her classmates looked at her afterward, and her grandfather's gentle encouragement. As she played, the decision grew clearer inside her. She was scared, yes, but she was also tired of hiding. Music was the only thing that made her feel like herself. Maybe it was time to stop keeping it locked away. The next day, when she entered the classroom, the atmosphere felt different. The students who usually ignored her now looked at her with curiosity and respect. A few even greeted her quietly. She sat at her desk feeling a little nervous, but also strangely supported. When the teacher walked in, their eyes met briefly. The teacher smiled gently, not the strict smile she used for discipline, but a warm, encouraging one. After class, the teacher approached her. "Have you thought about the event?" she asked. The girl took a small breath. "I think I want to do it." The teacher's smile grew. "I'm glad. You won't regret it. We'll start practicing after school today." True to her word, the teacher stayed after class with her that afternoon. She opened the piano lid and dusted it off gently, as if preparing something important. The girl stood nearby, feeling nervous but ready. "Let's find a piece that fits you," the teacher said. "Something you feel connected to. Something that lets your heart speak." They tried a few melodies, discussing each one. The teacher asked her what emotions she wanted to express, what felt natural in her hands. The girl appreciated how the teacher listened, never rushing her or telling her what she should choose. It felt like they were working together, building something meaningful. By the end of the hour, they selected a piece that felt right, calm in the beginning, powerful in the middle, and gentle at the end. A piece that mirrored her own personality. For the next few days, the girl stayed after school to practice. Students passing by peeked through the door, drawn by the sound of the piano. They no longer whispered about her. They simply listened. Each day, her confidence grew a little more. She began to look forward to the practices, knowing the teacher believed in her. The fear didn't disappear completely, but it no longer controlled her. One afternoon, as she played, the teacher watched with a soft expression. When the girl finished a difficult section, the teacher clapped quietly. "You've come a long way," she said, "and you're only getting stronger." The girl felt a small smile form on her lips, rare, but real. As the days passed, the idea of performing no longer terrified her. It still made her heart race, but for the first time, it raced with excitement instead of dread. Something inside her had opened up, something she had kept hidden for far too long. And though the event was still weeks away, she knew one thing for certain. This time, she wasn't playing to escape. She was playing to be heard. The days moved quickly as the school event drew near, but each one felt full and meaningful to the girl in a way she hadn't experienced before. Every afternoon, she stayed after class to practice with the teacher, and every evening she went home to rehearse on the old piano in her living room. The piece they chose grew more familiar to her fingers with every passing day. It felt like a friend she could trust, something that understood her without needing words. Her classmates, who once barely knew she existed, now treated her differently. Some would stop by the classroom during practice just to listen silently. Others wished her good luck when they saw her in the hallway. It was all new to her, strange but comforting. She still didn't talk much, but she didn't need to. People were beginning to see her through her music. The teacher continued to guide her, encouraging her to play with feeling, not just accuracy. She reminded her that music was more than notes. It was emotion, storytelling, a way of connecting with people. The girl listened carefully, absorbing every word. She trusted the teacher now, something she never thought would happen. After that difficult day, when everything began at home, her grandfather watched her progress with quiet pride. He would sit in his chair beside the piano each evening, listening with a soft smile as she played her piece over and over. He didn't need to say much. His presence alone gave her courage. Sometimes he hummed along with the melody, even if he didn't know the notes. It made her feel safe. As the event approached, her nervousness grew. She tried not to think about the crowd or the stage or the bright lights. Instead, she focused on the music itself. She reminded herself of why she loved playing, how it made her feel calm, free, understood. She hoped that if she held on to that, her fear wouldn't overwhelm her. The night before the event, she could hardly sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the dim ceiling, listening to the quiet around her. Her mind replayed every moment leading to this point, the day she was forced to play in class, the silence that followed her performance, the teacher's apology, the new friendships forming slowly. She felt different now, stronger, but she also felt the pressure of the moment ahead. Early the next morning, she stood in front of the mirror, brushing her hair slowly. Her reflection looked the same as always: quiet eyes, delicate hands, soft expression, but she knew she wasn't the same person she had been before. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her heart. Her grandfather knocked gently on her door. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. She nodded, even though she didn't feel entirely ready inside. When they arrived at the school, the courtyard was buzzing with excitement. Students and parents gathered around the entrance, chatting as they made their way inside. Posters announcing the event were taped to the walls, each one decorated with drawings and colorful designs from the art class. The girl walked beside her grandfather, gripping the strap of her bag tightly. She could feel her heart pounding harder with each step. She wondered if anyone else felt this nervous. When she entered the auditorium, her stomach tightened. It was larger than she remembered, with rows of seats stretching far back and a stage lit with warm, bright lights. Her teacher spotted her and walked over with a welcoming smile. "I'm glad you're here early," she said. "Let's get you settled." The girl nodded, grateful for the teacher's calm presence. They went backstage, where students were practicing lines, adjusting costumes, and rehearsing dances. The atmosphere was filled with excitement and nervous chatter. She found a small corner to stand in and took slow breaths, trying to keep her hands from shaking. Her teacher came over again. "Do you want to run through your piece one more time?" she asked. The girl nodded. They walked over to the practice piano backstage. She sat down and placed her fingers on the keys. For a moment, she closed her eyes, letting all the noise fade. Then she began to play. The melody flowed beautifully, filling the small space. The teacher listened quietly, feeling proud of how much the girl had grown. When she finished, the teacher gave her a gentle nod. "You're ready," she said. "Trust yourself. Trust your music." The girl looked at her teacher, feeling gratitude swell in her chest. She nodded again, though the nervousness didn't completely leave her. The event began with small performances, dances, short plays, poems, and group songs. The audience clapped with excitement for each one. The girl watched from backstage, trying to distract herself by listening to the applause and focusing on the rhythm of her breathing. When her name was finally announced, her heart skipped a beat. She looked at her teacher, who gave her a supportive smile. "Just play like you always do," the teacher whispered. "You're not alone up there. Your music is with you." With trembling hands, the girl stepped onto the stage. The lights were bright, almost blinding. She blinked, trying to adjust. She could barely make out the faces in the crowd. She moved slowly toward the piano at center stage, her legs feeling heavier than before. She sat on the bench, her back straight, her hands resting gently on her lap. For a moment, the silence in the auditorium felt overwhelming. She heard her heartbeat pounding in her ears. She wanted to run, but she stayed. She lifted her hands and placed them on the keys. The cold surface grounded her, reminding her of every moment she had practiced, every note she had played, every emotion she had poured into the music. She took one last breath. And then she began. The first notes filled the room softly, like a whisper floating through the air. The melody spread outward, reaching even the farthest seats of the auditorium. The room seemed to shift as people fell silent, listening closely. Her fingers moved smoothly, guided by muscle memory and emotion. The nervousness didn't disappear entirely, but it changed into something else: energy, determination, purposed out. As she continued, the music grew stronger. She felt herself sinking into it, allowing it to embrace her. The lights, the crowd, the fear, all of it faded as the melody took over. Each note told a part of her story: the quiet days, the struggles, the loneliness, the hidden dreams. Every rise and fall of the music reflected a piece of her heart. Her grandfather watched from the front row, his eyes shining. He held his hands together, leaning forward slightly, as if he didn't want to miss a single moment. The teacher stood backstage, proud and relieved, knowing the girl had found the courage she needed. As the music moved toward its peak, the girl lifted her hands with confidence she never knew she had. Her eyes stayed focused on the keys, her expression calm but filled with emotion. The audience watched in awe, completely drawn into the performance. Then, slowly, the music began to soften. The final notes were gentle, peaceful, like a closing whisper. She let the last sound linger in the air before lifting her hands. Silence wrapped around the room for a moment. Then applause erupted, loud, warm, long. People stood on their feet. Some clapped above their heads, others whistled, others simply stared in amazement. The girl blinked, overwhelmed. She had never heard applause like that before. She stood up slowly from the bench, her legs trembling, but her heart steady. She bowed her head gently. When she looked up, she saw her grandfather wiping a tear from his eye. She felt her own eyes grow warm. As she walked off the stage, the teacher greeted her with open arms. "You were incredible," she said, her voice full of emotion. "I'm so proud of you." The girl smiled shyly, still catching her breath. "Thank you," she whispered. After the event, students came to congratulate her. Some told her that her performance made them feel something they couldn't explain. Others said they never knew she had such a beautiful talent. Her grandfather hugged her tightly. "I knew you could do it," he said. "Your music speaks in ways words never could." For the rest of the night, the girl felt as though she was walking on air. The fear that once kept her silent had loosened its grip. She felt seen, heard, understood. The next day at school, everything felt different. Students greeted her warmly. The teacher spoke highly of her performance, praising her bravery and dedication. The girl didn't know how to respond to all the attention, but she appreciated every bit of it. She kept practicing every day, not because she needed to prove anything anymore, but because she loved music and wanted to grow. For the first time in a long while, she felt hopeful about the future. She felt like she belonged. Her life didn't suddenly become perfect, but something important had changed. She no longer hid the part of herself that mattered most, and it all began the moment she found the courage to let her music speak.